2 games into the season, the Seahawks have some question marks still to answer at the slot defender position. Could Artie Burns be one of the solutions as he comes back to the 53-man roster? We'll be breaking it all down in our latest edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to have my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, back in the saddle for our Tell the Truth Tuesday episode. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in Las Vegas, Nevada, or Palm Beach, Florida. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're going to be taking our first look at Seattle's upcoming opponent, the Carolina Panthers, behind enemy lines. And it's Tell the Truth Tuesday, our final words of wisdom coming out of Sunday's big win over the Lions at Ford Field and gearing up for this next home game in Week 3. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Now for your lead story here on Tell the Truth Tuesday on Locked On Seahawks. Though there were some defensive improvements in Sunday's win over the Lions, they still gave up 31 points, and the Seahawks had plenty of issues in their secondary. Most notably, they're trying to figure out the best mix and match combination with their cornerbacks and safeties. And the most glaring thing that stands out right now, Rob, is the slot cornerback position where Coby Bryant and Julian Love have been seeing most of the snaps. And earlier today, it was reported that Artie Burns is going to be signed to the 53-man roster. He played in the first 2 games as a practice squad call-up, obviously an experienced veteran that knows this scheme inside and out. But it's interesting, Rob, he's actually played 33 defensive snaps for the Seahawks in these first 2 games. So he hasn't just been elevated as an insurance policy. They've been playing him a lot of snaps as that dime defender, that 6th defensive back out there. But you look statistically, and it isn't even close. He has been the Seahawks' best slot defender in these first 2 games. And I'm wondering if this move is being made because the Seahawks are ready to mix things up a little bit because Coby Bryant and Julian Love have struggled a lot in these first 2 games.
Well, I think it's a variety of different things here. I think for one, as you just said, I think that Artie Burns is, just statistically has been Seattle's best nickel corner so far. Now, I would say this, that the slot receivers that the Seahawks have faced in Puka Nacua and in Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think are 2 of the absolute best on the Seahawks schedule this year. And so I do think that Coby Bryant and Julian Love have had a difficult set of matchups that they had to face. I also think that this might be a reflection of the fact that Rick Woolen was injured, of course, and that the Seahawks want to make sure that they have depth at the cornerback spots. And then, as you said, when Artie Burns, he's a veteran. He is a player that has proven himself on the outside as well as the inside. If the Seahawks were going to drop him down to the practice squad, then the same thing that the Seahawks have done, poach players from other teams' practice squad, I think a lot of other NFL teams might be looking to do the exact same thing. So I think that the Seahawks are trying to protect themselves a little bit by making sure they keep Artie Burns on the roster. I would be encouraged if he is to play for the Seahawks at the nickel spot a little bit more often because of what we have seen, not only here in Seattle, but previously in his NFL career. But I also think that it's not just as simple as just saying that Artie Burns is now going to be the starter at the nickel spot and that Coby Bryant and Julian Love basically are going to be riding pine from here on out.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be riding the pine, but I think that you could see some by committee approach with this slot position right now until somebody really jumps out and takes that spot, because now you got Devin Witherspoon starting at left cornerback. They threw him right into the starting lineup across from Rick Woolen. And though he had a few big mistakes in that game, there were several big plays as well. I'm sure we'll get to that later, but they're going to be able to really experiment with that slot cornerback spot until they find the right combination or the player that is best equipped to handle that spot. Julian Love has been really good in the slot throughout his career. So these first 2 games, maybe it's just been a little bit of an aberration. He's going to figure things out, but it has been a struggle. And Kobe Bryant has given up a lot of catches. And as you mentioned, they've gone against some really difficult opponents. Puka Nacua went out against the 49ers and had another monster game. So if you're somebody that was yelling at Seahawks defenders, why'd you give up so many catches to him? Well, the 49ers defense did it too. So I think it's time to pay close attention that Nacua is probably going to be a major problem for years to come in the NFC West. And of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown as well, having to deal with him working out of the slot. So 2 of the better slot receivers in the NFC. Nacua has already emerged as one of those. That has certainly made it more challenging for these guys. But if you look at the stats so far this year, Rob, and again, a very small sample size, but Julian Love has only played 5 more snaps in the slot in the first 2 games than Artie Burns. But look at the stark difference in production. Artie Burns has given up 1 catch on 2 targets. So he hasn't been targeted much when he's been in the game, but he's been effective. He's come up and he's made tackles. Julian Love has allowed 6 catches for 99 yards. He gave up a touchdown on the opening drive for the Lions on Sunday to Josh Reynolds down the seam. Pass rating of 155.7, according to Pro Football Focus, is the worst among all qualified slot defenders, whether corners, safeties, even linebackers. It is the worst passer rating allowed in the first 2 games. Again, it's a very small sample size, and I think the Seahawks are going to be more than patient with him because he's a player they really were excited to bring in free agency. But he has struggled. Kobe Bryant's passer rating against is over 100 as well. So they're going to continue to take looks at Artie Burns here because I think he has earned that opportunity. And what's interesting, Rob, is he had played 42 snaps in the slot in his first 6 NFL seasons. This is not a position that he had played very much. And they just kind of threw him inside in their final preseason game. Well, let's see if he can do it. And he had a really good game against the Packers. And so now they've continued to give him those opportunities. And 29 of his 33 snaps so far these first 2 games have been in the slot, and he's done a really nice job. So I think he has earned that opportunity, considering that the other players getting the snaps there have not gotten off to a good start. So this is not the end of the line for Julian Love. It's not the end of the line for Kobe Bryant. But I mean, if Artie Burns can come in and play well, then it might be difficult, especially with Jamal Adams potentially being ready to play this weekend and further cutting into playing time for some of these guys.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a possibility. I also think that, again, we're talking about Kobe Bryant, and the Seahawks had already been experimenting using him at safety. Julian Love, to me, that is his more, I think that's going to be where he's more comfortable. I think that's where his skill set fits in best, is playing a safety spot rather than a nickel spot where you're going to be lined up sometimes in one-on-one coverage responsibilities. And I go back to what I saw Julian Love with the New York Giants, and really where he really excelled is in the last couple of years in Wink Martindale's system that allowed him to kind of come up almost like Jamal Adams and play closer to the line of scrimmage at times. And Seattle is not asking him to play exactly the same way. So the same reason that we've kind of talked about with some of the younger players and why they should get a little bit of grace because they are young, inexperienced players. While Julian Love has been in the NFL for several years now, obviously he is new to Seattle, and there's going to be some lumps here. So I do think that those are things to kind of keep in mind. I would expect to see, assuming that Jamal Adams comes back and is healthy and ready to go, that you're going to see Adams kind of resume as that starter at the strong safety position or rover and coming down and playing in the box. That's where Jamal Adams is at his best. I think the same thing with Julian Love, that they're going to allow him to play back in space a little bit more. And if you're going to ask your nickel defenders to be playing man-on-man coverage a little bit, then you probably should be going more with player who has a little bit more cornerback experience. That to me is, again, going to be Artie Burns, possibly Kobe Bryant. Julian Love can do it. I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that one of the biggest plays against the Detroit Lions was a play that Julian Love was in beautiful position. Amon-Ra St. Brown just really showed his strength and savvy to be able to pull that ball in. And I think that would have changed the statistics a little bit here. So I think this is a good problem, if there is such a thing as a good problem for the Seahawks to have, because they have so many good defensive backs that you have to try and carve out different roles for them to be their most successful.
As you said, and I pointed this out on social media, Julian Love has been victimized a little bit these first two games by outstanding throws from Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff. There certainly have been some missed opportunities where he's blown his assignment in coverage. He has not played well by any means, but he also has had to deal with some really tricky plays and just excellent throws. Sometimes you're going to get beat in this league. The other team is getting paid as well. One last thing that I'm going to mention here, I'm going to keep saying until it actually happens. You know, if you're going to have a healthy Reek Woolen out there this weekend, Devin Witherspoon across, I mean, wouldn't you like to see Trey Brown still on the field somehow? And I know Seattle has not given him a look in the slot at any point to this point in his career, but can't his hat be in this ring too? I'm just saying, I feel like that's something the Seahawks have to consider, but they've got a number of options and they need to figure out what is the best group that we can put out there with a healthy Jamal Adams, healthy Reek Woolen, Devin Witherspoon back. Who is going to be the best slot defender for the defense and the personnel that we have around them? They've still got several weeks here to try to figure that out here early in the season. So we'll see what happens. Coming up next, it's Tell the Truth Tuesday. We're going to have our final words of wisdom coming out of Sunday's game and going into week 3. You won't want to miss it. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends at Jace Medical. 2 years ago, I randomly got sick during the middle of the day on a Sunday, and I didn't want to have to rush to an urgent care to get a big medical bill. So thank goodness I had the Jace case from Jace Medical with immediate antibiotics that I could use to get myself feeling better fast without all the upfront costs associated with heading to an emergency room or urgent care. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace case. The Jace case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jace Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand, and Jace Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these lifetime antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using the code Locked On at checkout at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, promo code Locked On. Get ready for week 3 in the NFL with incredible offers from our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, such as the Seahawks being a 4.5-point underdog this past weekend against Detroit. Player props, such as Geno Smith's improving MVP odds, over-unders, and much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12 out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Tomorrow, it's our latest installment of Matchup Wednesday. We're going to dive into some key matchups to watch when the Seahawks host the Carolina Panthers at Lumen Field. You won't want to miss it. Let's get to Tell the Truth Tuesday, shall we, Rob? And it's time for us to dish out our words of wisdom. Now, unfortunately, you did not get to share your Monday musings yesterday, so this may be a little bit of a blend of Monday musings with Tell the Truth Tuesday, at least from your perspective. And we haven't had a chance to hear on your thoughts coming out of this game. And I know that we were talking before the show, and it wasn't necessarily about stats. There was something else that jumped out to you that was most impressive about this win for the Seahawks on the road at a hostile Ford Field environment.
Yeah, and that would be resiliency. I thought that the Seahawks showed incredible resiliency. And, let's face it, let's just call it what it was. Week 1, at least after halftime, the Seahawks laid an egg. And to be able to come back and play as physical from the snap, the very first snap of this game, as physical as they did, showed the resiliency that they did. Geno Smith, I thought, was as good as I've ever seen him. And rather than just focus focus in on the quarterback. I think to see, say, the guy who snaps him the ball, Evan Brown, to be knocked out of that game and to come back, and play the rest of that game again, showed resiliency. You as well, we were critical of Shane Waldron, and just in the play calling and the play design, the lack of using the tight ends in game one, especially after the injuries to the offensive tackles. Again, I thought showed great resiliency. To me, this was about as good of a game plan as I've ever seen the Seahawks have, and that's going back years and years. But I really thought the Seahawks did a great job of minimizing Detroit's pass rush, moving the pocket. I mentioned Geno Smith before. His quickness, his aggression, and stepping up into the pocket, evading the pass rush, making quick decisions with the ball, resiliency. DK Metcalf, I mean, the catch down at the end zone where he just gets absolutely creamed by two Detroit defenders, and then again comes back, makes the critical catch down the stretch in the overtime session. With the young cornerback, Devin Witherspoon, being able to make big plays early on, get beat for the flea flicker touchdown later on, but again, continue to make big plays down the stretch. The running back, I mean, I can go on and on and on about what a terrific performance I thought that this was from the Seahawks. It was a game that honestly, I thought that they would have to play almost impeccable football to be able to beat a Detroit Lions team, because as you said, they were at home. They were feeling good about themselves. It was very, very loud there. And the Seahawks, just through sheer will, it seemed like, won this football game. So to me, resiliency is the word that immediately came to my mind, because the Seahawks did get punched in the mouth a couple of times in this game, but they came back firing and punching back better than I had seen them do so, certainly in the week one.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a role reversal. You went from being the team that was ahead at halftime in week one and then getting punched in the mouth a bunch of times after halftime. You're trailing 7 points in the scoreboard to the Lions in this game, and you find a way, even after giving up a 10-point lead late, you still find a way to get the job done. And on the road, you're going to have things that don't go your way, like that horrible intentional grounding penalty that, by the way, that was not intentional grounding by any definition in the book. But the point is, there were some things that were working against the Seahawks in this football game. There were injuries. There were guys that were playing at well below 100%, and it didn't matter. They found a way to get through it. So you are correct, good sir. I think resiliency was certainly something that showed up in all phases for the Seahawks in this game. Even Jason Myers, who missed 2 field goals in the first half, he was able to go out in the second half, and he made a key field goal in the third quarter. He made his extra point. So even he was able to bounce back from what has been a pretty disastrous start for him after signing that new contract. You mentioned the running back position, and I thought Ken Walker III had a solid game, even though he didn't have a great statistical afternoon. There was not a lot of running room for him most of the day. But I want to talk about the other running back that Seattle invested a second-round pick in back in April. I think it's time to give Zach Charbonnet a bit more run, rotating with Ken Walker III. And I'm not making the argument that he should be the starter or he should be getting a 50-50 share or anything like that. But he just brings a different dynamic to this football team. And it felt like, at least in this game, I would have liked to see a few more carries for Zach Charbonnet, because between the tackles, it felt like this is one of those games where that downhill runner, he just finds ways to get yardage, whether it's barreling over a guy. He had a 9-yard run in this game that was as impressive of a 9-yard run as you are going to see. And kudos to Jake Bobo for lead blocking 3 guys on this play. But Zach Charbonnet was turned backpedaling, and he was still powering his way backward and gained 4 yards after contact, showing off the incredible power that he has in his lower body. You saw the contact balance and a couple other runs. He had a really impressive pass protection rep, picking up a blitz to protect Geno Smith. I've just been really happy with what I've seen from him these first couple games, and they're trying to get his feet wet a little bit. I think you got to really embrace this two-headed monster, and it's felt like it's been about a 75% share for Walker. I'm giving Charbonnet a few more opportunities, especially on third down, because he's looked good in pass protection. He's looked good catching the football. He has proven he can do everything, and he just brings a different type of juice to their run game with the physicality and the power and just the sheer will. He's a bully running the football, and I really enjoy watching it. It's a nice change of pace back, truly complementary runners. Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet. So I want to see a little more of number 26 moving forward.
No, I 100% agree with you. I mean, I love Zach Charbonnet's game at UCLA. I loved it at Michigan previous to that. I think that he just fits in very nicely with something that I thought the Seahawks lacked at the running back position. And believe me, I'm a huge fan of Ken Walker III. I mentioned it before, the resiliency. I thought that it was kind of, almost poetic that on the day that the Detroit Lions unveiled the statue of Barry Sanders, he was there, in person for that game. The jump cut where Ken Walker scores a touchdown and almost goes backward with that, jump cut that he scores the very first touchdown. I mean, it is absolutely Barry Sanders-like type of a run. But as dynamic as Barry Sanders was, and to me, to this day, he is still the most entertaining running back I've ever seen. I think you can make an argument that he's the best running back that we've all seen. At the same time, he's not a physical back. He has some, his game was about finesse. It was about make you miss. It was about speed. And Zach Charbonnet brings that power that sometimes you need to have as well. And so, I think I was envious, frankly, just watching the Detroit Lions and the way that they were rotating their dynamic young rookie, Jahmyr Gibbs, and just the burst that he has, but also the power that David Montgomery possesses. The Seahawks have that exact same kind of a combination in Ken Walker and, of course, Zach Charbonnet, and DJ Dallas is a heck of a back as well. So that's the thing to me that, again, I think that the Seahawks are proving that their strategy of using second-round picks the last couple of years on running back, while it might anger some, there is some brilliance behind that as well. Zach Charbonnet is an awfully good football player. I think you're going to see that success continue to come to bear fruit as we move forward.
Let's talk defense now, Rob. And you mentioned Devin Witherspoon already earlier in the show with the flea flicker that he bit on the play. Let's be honest, everybody on the Seahawks defense bit on that. If you watch the replay, it was an entire defense breakdown. And unfortunately, Witherspoon was the guy that had the receiver that he was covering. They caught the touchdown, but Jared Goff could have thrown a touchdown to another player on the other side. The coverage just did not. They were not prepared, and they got completely tricked. It was a perfectly timed flea flicker called by offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, but there were also some really good plays from Devin Witherspoon, and he bounced back 2 fourth down plays. Draymond Jones came back from really 3 rough halves to start his Seahawks career, and he was really unblockable at times in the second half. It just felt like this defense, you started to see some chemistry stuff up front, and Devin Witherspoon, you got to see some of the flashes of the type of player that he can be for the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, buddy. I mean, I think that with Devin Witherspoon, I mean, basically the very first open field tackle that he made, this is a guy who didn't play an awful lot of college football, and yet the Seahawks, of course, selected him number 5 overall. There's an awful lot of gamble there, but Pete Carroll talked about how he just saw a level of instincts that Devin Witherspoon that reminded him of Troy Polamalu. I mean, those are big words, a big comparison there, but you saw the playmaking ability, you saw the physicality, you saw the instincts. Anybody who was watching that game, I think, saw what a player that Devin Witherspoon could be for the Seahawks. So that's super exciting. And then Draymond Jones, the very first sack that he got, I mean, he does a spin move to his left, does a spin move to his right. You see the athletic ability, you see the want to, the desire. I think that, again, that Draymond Jones and Devin Witherspoon, you're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg of what these players can be able to provide for the Seahawks. And that is going to, I believe, make this defense get better as the year goes on, which is what we've seen from Pete Carroll's teams oftentimes in the past. And I think it's awfully exciting about what the future may hold for a team, just considering how young this team is and how much speed that they have as well.
For my last Tell the Truth Tuesday wisdom here on defense, some of our listeners are going to view this as me being a negative Nancy, maybe, or, too skeptical coming out of a win. But I'm just going to say this because we've gotten to see Darrell Taylor play now. This is his 3rd season he has gotten to play for the Seahawks. And I think Darrell Taylor is a fantastic pass rusher. So I still think he has a chance to be an impact player for this football team. But I have seen enough experimenting with him as a starter. And I know Boye Mafe was inactive in this game. And Taylor had the most starting experience of any of the players that were active aside from Uchenna Nwosu. So this was going to be his opportunity to go out there and show that he has improved as a run defender. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing it. I'm still seeing teams game planning to run at him, and I don't blame him. He has not shown that he can get the job done. He had one play that he got in the backfield, should have had a 3-yard tackle for loss, and he whiffed on the tackle. It ended up turning into a 6-yard gain. And then on one of the touchdown runs that the Lions had, who was the player that got booted inside? It was Darrell Taylor.
Tight end.
He is a liability against the run, and you can't have a starting outside linebacker or defensive end. I don't care if it's a 4-3 or 3-4. You cannot have a starter who is that much of a liability defending the run. So if Boye Mafe has to miss a second game, I've been told Seattle's very optimistic he's going to be available against Carolina. But if somehow Boye Mafe can't play in this upcoming game, I'm letting Derek Hall get the first start of his NFL career, because I thought he played pretty well in the second half against Detroit, and he had a couple nice plays against the run. I'm more confident already that he is going to be able to be a better all-around player, and then you can still get Darrell Taylor his pass rushes. I've seen enough at this point. I just don't know that we're going to see a starter caliber player out of him, because the run defense just hasn't taken those strides forward that need to, and teams, they game plan for him to attack him. Detroit was doing it. I just don't see him as a starter, unfortunately. I think he can still be a big-time player for them hunting quarterbacks, but I think that there is a ceiling with him just because there's just such a drop-off with his run defense, and you can't have that in your starting lineup. Coming up next, we're going to take a first look at the Carolina Panthers. What's new? Additions, departures, draft picks, plus some offensive and defensive behind-the-scenes details on personnel and scheme. We'll get to those here in a moment on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. This week on PrizePicks, I'm going with Ken Walker III to rush for more than 75 yards, and I've also got Derrick Henry getting 80-plus for the Titans. PrizePicks is an absolute blast each week, and it's an easy way to enjoy daily fantasy without any hassle and land quick winnings. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedInNFL and use the code LockedInNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedInNFL and use the code LockedInNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Don't forget, tomorrow it's Matchup Wednesday. We're going to dive into all the key matchups to watch when the Seahawks host the Panthers at Lumen Field on Sunday. You won't want to miss it. Speaking of those Carolina Panthers, Rob, this is a team that has gotten off to a rough start here with new coach Frank Reich losing their first 2 games. They lost to the Saints last night. Ended up being a closer game on the scoreboard than what it really was. A garbage touchdown late made it look like it was close, but New Orleans was in command for most of this football game. And the Panthers are trying to break in the number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young. They've had some injuries on both sides of the ball, and it feels like this is a team that it's going to take some time for them to find their way.
No, I 100% agree with you. As you said, I mean, they used the number 1 overall pick on a quarterback, Bryce Young, and so they're making that transition to to a young rookie quarterback, and I remain very, very, very high on Bryce Young. I think he's going to be an absolute superstar in the NFL. And I was encouraged by some of the signs I've seen from him. But at the same time, I just don't see a lot of playmakers around him as part of the big trade that Carolina did to acquire him. Of course, they got rid of the most talented wide receiver they've had, in my opinion, since Steve Smith in DJ Moore, who they peddled to Chicago for that number 1 overall selection. They have some interesting additions to this club. DJ Chark, Adam Thielen are the 2 wide receivers that I think are the veterans that should be able to help Bryce Young's acclimation to the NFL, but Chark hasn't been able to get on the field yet. Thielen did catch that garbage touchdown, as you mentioned, which I thought was or that you referenced a moment ago. I thought it was a terrific play by Bryce Young against the New Orleans Saints there, but it was just too little too late. Miles Sanders, to me, is one of the more interesting additions for that club. The Deuce Staley, the former longtime NFL running back, is now calling the plays for the Carolina Panthers, and he pushed for his former protege, Miles Sanders, back with Philadelphia to move on to Carolina. The Carolina Panthers signed him, and Miles Sanders is a good back, but I don't know that he is dynamic enough to take a lot of the pressure off of the young quarterback at this point. So to me, this still feels like a very young team. As you said, they're 0-2, and there are significant losses. They're against the Atlanta Falcons in week 1, the New Orleans Saints, as we talked about, in week 2. So 2 divisional losses. They are going to come to Seattle hungry. They're going to come to Seattle after beating the Seahawks, of course, a year ago. So while the Carolina Panthers look like somebody you don't have to worry about, I think that the Seahawks would be wise to make sure they're paying attention. Don't give Bryce Young any opportunity to leave Seattle with his very first NFL victory.
And I think it's also worth noting, you definitely don't want to sleep on this team, because remember what happened last year when you had the Carolina Panthers come to town. Seattle was a heavy favorite, and what happened? Carolina ran the ball all over them and ended up leaving Seattle with the victory. And the Seahawks were lucky to make the playoffs, because that was one of those losses. They went 0-4 last year against the NFC South. They're going to be looking to get a little bit of revenge here in this football game. When you look at this offense, it has been a failure to launch here early with the rookie quarterback, Bryce Young, and not all of that is on him. He's tied for 30th, averaging 4.2 yards per pass attempt. But he's also, this is what's kind of interesting, is the Panthers are near the top of the NFL for giving up sacks, and yet Bryce Young has the second most time to throw, according to Pro Football Focus, 3.2 seconds per pass attempt in his first 2 games. So the offensive line hasn't been great. At the same time, I think there has been some plays where Bryce Young just hasn't gotten the football out of his hands, and some of that might be the lack of playmakers that they have on the outside at the receiver position. What they do have, as you mentioned, with Miles Sanders, they are 8th in rushing yards, 4th in yards per carry. Miles Sanders is a dynamic back. Bryce Young can run the football really well. He is a dual threat capable player. And Carolina's also got a couple other guys like Chuba Hubbard that can run the football, and he had a big game last year against the Seahawks at Lumen Field. So that is the big concern going into this football game. As you know, Carolina's offensive line, the Panthers are in the top 10 in yards before contact in the league. That shows you where the offensive line is at. They might not be pass protecting as well as anticipated, but this is a line that has some talented young players that they've drafted. They've got Ikwanu over at the tackle position that he is looking like a budding star. They are getting after in the run game. I think that that is the area with this offense that runs so much under center. They are going to get that run game rolling. Seattle is going to have to show these first 2 weeks weren't an aberration and that they can defend the run, because that's ultimately what cost them last year when they played the Panthers and Carolina came and got that upset win on the road.
Yeah, that's why I'm excited to kind of, be breaking down the matchups between the Seahawks and the Panthers in tomorrow's show, just because, like you mentioned, Ike Ekwonu, for example, the big tackle who was selected so early, the only offensive lineman that was selected before Charles Cross 2 years ago. Ekwonu is the better run blocker. Charles Cross is the better pass blocker. We talked about that before. And so I'm not at all surprised that he is still continuing to struggle. And when you have a quarterback who is as slight as Bryce Young is, well, as I just said, how high I am on him, I just think that he has a different level of anticipation and accuracy than any of the other quarterbacks that were in this draft class. I still have very much concerns about his ability to physically hold up, especially if he does run the ball as often as he is choosing to do so early on this season. So it's going to be an interesting matchup for the Seahawks in that regard. I think on the defensive side of the ball, where Seattle has to kind of be careful, is this is a pretty formidable pretty formidable Carolina defensive line. And while the Seahawks might be feeling very, very good about the way that their tackle Stone Forsythe and Jake Curham performed in that hostile environment against guys like Aiden Hutchinson, they are a different type of a pass rush than the Carolina Panthers here, with like a guy like a Brian Burns, who is pure speed. Aiden Hutchinson is a really good football player. Jake Curran deserves an awful lot of credit. Same thing with Stone Forsythe, but neither of them possess the straight burst and bend that some of Carolina's pass rushers have. So this is going to be a different challenge, a little bit faster type of a challenge on the outside. And that has been one of the concerns I've had in the past with a player like Jake Curran. So I'm very curious to see if the Seahawks are able to slow down that pass rush, if they're able to slow down the interior. Derek Brown's a terrific football player that not a lot of people talk about, but he is one of the rising stars in terms of the interior defensive line in the NFL. And then the Carolina Panthers also have some real talent at the cornerback position as well. So one of the things that I was really excited about, the resiliency I mentioned before, was how the Seahawks were able to kind of come back and play as well as they did at the tackle and tight end positions. I think that's going to be critical that they continue to use that recipe against Carolina, because again, Carolina has an awful lot of pass rushers and cornerbacks that might make Geno Smith's options a little bit more limited to the interior, the middle of the field, I should say.
Yeah, the one thing that is working for the Seahawks, the Panthers are still playing great pass defense even without it, but J.C. Horn had an interception early in the game last year where he baited Geno Smith. It looked like the throw was open, and as soon as he unloaded it, J.C. Horn made his jump, moved up, and picked off the pass. Well, J.C. Horn is on injured reserve, so he is not going to be playing this game. He's going to miss a significant amount of time. So Seattle's not going to have to worry about him, but Carolina still has several good corners. It's a drop-off from J.C. Horn, who is a all-pro caliber player when he's healthy. He's just had some injuries these first couple of years, unfortunately, for Carolina. But he's a good player, but he's out. They're not going to have him in this football game, and so that'll open things up a little bit more. But this Panthers team is interesting. They are third in the NFL so far in these first two games with a 12.7% sack rate, but they're near the bottom of the league in pressure rate. So they have not been getting heat consistently in quarterbacks, but when they do, they are finishing. And guys like Brian Burns getting after the quarterback, the Panthers have been able to do that. They've given up less than 300 passing yards in these first two games. They're one of the best pass defenses in the NFL. But it's interesting because we talked about Carolina, their run offense. I think the run defense is where their vulnerability might be. They are in the top 10, or really the bottom 10, in rushing yards and yards per attempt these first two games. And even though they've got a lot of talent up there, guys like Brian Burns are vulnerable against the run. He is an athletic upfield pass rusher. If you can get physical with him in the run game, though, you can take advantage of him. And the same thing can be said about Brown in the middle. If there's a weakness in his game, he can be pushed around a little bit there. So this is a game where the Seahawks, they weren't able to run very well against Detroit. But this is an opponent where it feels like you're going to have to be able to run the football well, because that is an area that is not a strength for this Carolina defense, especially with the injuries that they have at linebacker right now as well. This is a front seven that you should be able to run the football on.
Possibly. I want to see the Seahawks be able to do that. As you said before about them, that you would like to see a little bit more Zach Charbonnet. I think that, again, Seattle is going to have to kind of continue to use that rotation. But I do expect us to see a big play from Seattle's running backs, coming up here pretty soon. Just you have two dynamic talents there. I think it's just sooner rather than later, you are going to see one of Seattle's backs, perhaps both of them, be able to break some 25-plus yard jaunts, coming up here pretty soon.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter, Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe, Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Tomorrow, it's Matchup Wednesday. We've kind of already previewed a few of the matchups we're going to be diving into, but we're going to look at more specifics. Where do the Seahawks have advantages? Where should they be concerned about this Panthers team coming to town? What could be a potential matchup problem for them on both sides of the ball? We're going to be breaking it all down. So make sure that you are listening in. Thanks for tuning into this Tuesday episode, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Go Hawks.